presents Hate Crime, written by Joyce King, performed by Jennifer Van Dyke. The desire to turn away from a crime as grotesque as the murder of James Byrd, Jr. is understandable. Once justice is done, what is the point of wallowing in the hideousness of the crime? There is a need to understand the rage and the impulses that lead so many to mayhem in the name of some warped sense of superiority. Dragging someone to his death behind a truck may be unusual, but torturing, maiming, and killing people because they fit a despised profile is an everyday occurrence. We can't stop it if we aren't willing to look at it. Bob Herbert, The New York Times. Prologue. As the sheriff of Jasper County daydreamed about an invigorating round of golf, he hummed down the highway to Dallas. Hitting the links on a gorgeous day was the anticipated payoff for the 250-mile trip Billy Rolls decided to make on a magnificent Sunday morning. But he would not putt one single time. An hour into his excursion, the veteran lawman overheard an urgent message on the two-way radio. Rolls listened carefully to the panicked voices of his dispatchers and deputies. A black body had been found in the middle of Huff Creek Road, in a predominantly African-American community of the same name. Rolls found a place to turn around his truck, a white, wide-body Ford F-250. He grabbed his mobile phone to check in with Alice Rector, one of the dispatchers. She confirmed that what the sheriff heard was indeed true. Rolls didn't bother with red lights or sirens. Traffic was predictably sparse. He floored the gas pedal, broke all the speed limits to get home. A short time later, Rolls was on the outskirts of the little town he loves. Huff Creek Road played cruel host to a steady stream of law enforcement officials. Residents poured out to examine the broken, naked black body. Nervous investigators, including the entire 14-deputy sheriff's department and most of Jasper's 18 police officers, helped seal off the area to prevent contamination of crime scene evidence. A frightened father, worried about a son who did not make it home Saturday night, moaned and wondered aloud if the black body was that of his son. A neighbor whose house was nearby studied the face and cautioned others that the devil was loose. It doesn't matter who he catches. At least one officer at the scene, Sergeant James Carter, knew exactly who had been snared. It was another man's son. The only African-American in the sheriff's department, Carter was a constant source of pride for thousands in the piney woods of East Texas. They trusted and respected him, a man whose rich mahogany features, chiseled, honest face, and coal-black hands offered comfort to many. They counted on the handsome deputy to make sure truth and justice prevailed for them. Like other investigators at the scene, Carter fielded questions from scared residents, then approached the disfigured body. As he watched his white colleagues unroll yellow investigative tape, Carter knew in his heart it was James Byrd, Jr., a childhood friend. But a few of the other investigators were convinced it was someone who merely resembled Byrd. The quiet deputy, meanwhile, continued to interview and calm members of the community. Plainclothes and uniformed men bagged piece after piece of evidence, including keys and a wallet. More than 25 officers compared notes as they tracked a 3-mile trail of dried blood and flesh. A driver's license easily ruled out the missing son and identified James Byrd, Jr. Determined to do everything by the book, officers waited for positive identification from fingerprints before alerting the family. While they waited, teams split up to check out possible leads. One came from inside the dead man's wallet, a simple grocery store receipt. Carter made the short drive with other investigators to check out store surveillance tape, video that confirmed what he already knew. Verification was instant. James Byrd, Jr., walked out of the H.E.B. pantry on Saturday night, June 6th, 1998. It just did something to me as soon as I saw that walk, Carter sighed. Unmistakably, the strut belonged to a man the deputy grew up with, hung out and remained friends with, even though as adults they were sometimes on opposite sides of the law. Back at the Aubrey E. Cole Law Enforcement Center, sheriff's headquarters on Birch Street, Carter took a call from his boss and informed Billy Rolls that the body had just been positively identified. The man everyone in town knows as Billy slowly left the crime scene with a lump in his throat. Rolls drove, not that eager, not that fast, from Huff Creek Road to 101 Birch Street to pick up Carter. Neither man, both out of uniform because it was a Sunday, wanted to make the 3-minute trip to 128 West Broad Street. On the abbreviated ride, Sergeant Carter searched his mind for the right words and silently recalled how his boyhood friend stood in front of his house to shoot the breeze 2 weeks before his tragic death. Byrd prophetically assured Carter then that one day, as a singer, he would put Jasper on the map. Carter couldn't help but think how he vowed, "Millions of people are going to know my name." Once there, the two lawmen looked around the close-knit, racially mixed neighborhood, just a few blocks from headquarters. Rolls and Carter, one white, one black, the sheriff in a 10-gallon hat, and the loyal deputy in a department-issued baseball cap. Both faces different shades of flush, parked directly in front of the Byrd family home. Paul Brister, the chief deputy, joined the grim procession, along with Dory Coleman, a local mortician. They converged at the front steps, at the speckled chestnut frame house. Betty Boatner, a full-figured, attractive, brown-skinned woman, was first to spot them. Boatner, home with her parents, looked gravely at the four men, inspected their pity-filled faces, and instantly started to cry. If Revelation chapter 6, verse 8 made sense to anyone, it did to her. "And I looked, behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him." "Here come the sheriff, James, and Mr. Coleman," Boatner cried as she informed her parents. As the group of men took slow-motion steps, Boatner was sure of one thing. Whatever it was these men came to say on a Sunday afternoon was bad. The sight of county lawmen with their long faces and sad eyes, accompanied by the polite man who buried the dead, provided only one clue. The pale horse was being led home. Intimations just hours before, including a news bulletin on television and radio about the black male victim of a hideous death, did not strike familiar. The thought that the dead man out on Huff Creek Road was the one they affectionately called Son never entered the minds of anyone in the Byrd household. 73-year-old James Byrd Sr., amazingly stronger than his years would suggest, had gotten up bright and early, as he always does on Sunday mornings. Just after 7, the small, dark, bespectacled deacon dutifully prepared for service at the Greater New Bethel Baptist Church on Martin Luther King Boulevard. Inside the vanilla brick sanctuary, everything was not praise as usual. Reverend Kenneth Lyons, studious minister at Greater New Bethel, rose from his throne-like chair, paused, and gave a serious glance to the few African-American men in his congregation. Lyons had looked out at the distressed, masculine faces, while faithful sisters still remained in various women-only classes. Finally, the minister uttered a stern warning. "Be cautious as you move about. Be careful." Black men of all shapes, sizes, ages, and skin tones gazed around the room at each other for comfort, for support. With an eerie look and a sound frighteningly reminiscent of civil rights days, Reverend Lyons lowered his voice to explain to the small, attentive crowd that a black man had been found savagely murdered. Lyons offered another gory detail: the gruesome discovery of the unidentified man found beheaded is extra cause for concern in our community. Brother Bird, like most chilled by the offensive news, understood the ripple of fragmented fear and anger, but had no particular reason to believe the dead man was his son, his namesake. The older Bird shook his head at the sorry state of affairs and clung tightly to his Bible with a deep sorrow for some poor family. Sunday school dismissed, James Bird Sr. prepared for the worship service. Perched on his favorite pew, a thick, comfortable green cushion with matching carpet the color of money, at a heavenly little church in which he felt protected and loved, the God-fearing deacon began to pray. After the service, he continued his routine and headed home to spend a peaceful Sunday afternoon with his wife. 6 steps led to a curved stretch of sidewalk, connected to a front porch of winding greenery. A wooden rail offered the sheriff, deputies, and mortician little support for what was ahead. Painted a fudge color on the sides, the neat house had 3 lighter shades of brown in front, a kaleidoscopic overlay of vertical rose in tan, milk chocolate, and the color of tree bark. A weatherized screen door opened about the same time Rolls and Carter neared the edge of the small front porch. Signs of life were everywhere. Elephant ear plants stood at attention, while other leafy vines blended in. A single red rose bush to the left of the door, out in the yard, was almost hidden underneath a sticker bush. Smells of a down-home Sunday dinner wafted through the small garden. The veteran lawmen had delayed delivering the news for as long as they could. With as much compassion as possible, the sheriff of Jasper County told Stella and James Bird Sr., "A man found dead on Huff Creek Road this morning has been positively identified as your son, James Bird, Jr." Rolls thought of the excruciatingly painful words he was not about to say. That 49-year-old James Bird, Jr., their son, their brother, their loved one, was out in the middle of the road like so many scattered pieces of a puzzle, dragged to death like an animal. He could not say that. They heard the ungodly news 3 times before it made a dent. They were stunned and incredulous at first, then angry and unassailably sad. Words of comfort, unanswered questions, and a plethora of emotions merged into an ocean of sorrow. Betty Boatner tried to comfort her aging parents as all 3 bravely mustered up the strength to continue listening. The pale horse was gone. Mission completed. Nothing for the Bird family would ever be the same. They knew this. Son was gone forever. In his place, body parts scattered over Huff Creek Road, changed and rearranged. All that was left of a loved one were personal effects, strewn all over a nameless logging road. Betty Boatner immediately began to call family members, including her 6 other siblings, to tell them the unthinkable news. Not only had son been murdered, but for some reason unbeknown to the family, he was the victim of an atrocious deed, done under the cover of darkness. The ghastly nightmare they starred in woke a sleeping nation. Overwhelmed, the Bird family watched the sunset. It brought a glimmer of comfort that their tiny home was filled with friends and neighbors, ready to take the next difficult step with them. Night fell quickly. Someone remembered it was still Sunday. They prayed for justice and embraced Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 to 2. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die. For James Bird, Jr., the circle was complete. Part 1. Black and White Collision. Chapter 1. Jasper is extremely small, a typical East Texas bedroom community. Home to nearly 8,000 people, it is the county seat, a proud distinction for any Texas town. Ask some residents, and they'll tell you the city of Jasper is historically, as well as geographically, too near the likes of Vidor, Texas, a defiant Klan stronghold about 55 miles away. Folks who don't belong in Vidor, particularly black folks, steer clear of it. Listen to a few others, and Jasper is a bastion of racial equality, a prosperous and fair place to raise kids, to set a good example. Enlightened people who live within Jasper's city limits point to its obvious differences. Their mayor, R.C. Horn, is black. Prominent leaders of both races get along and work well together, and the census shows that the town itself is roughly made up of equal parts. Though it fluctuates, Jasper is approximately 45% African American and about 48% Anglo, with most of the remaining percentage Hispanic. It is a pretty place, strikingly clean, contemporary, but still connected to timeless traditions. Jasper has a rich history and attracts annual tourists for hugely profitable bass fishing tournaments. A sprinkling of brand-name chain hotels, as well as quaint little lodging houses, lots of churches, tasty homemade food, and friendly people give Jasper a reputation for being a cut above most East Texas towns. It even has what proud residents jokingly call the Mall, its huge 24-hour Walmart supercenter, the biggest deal in town. That the slow pace in Jasper does not hold much interest for its young people is something with which town leaders constantly struggle. There are 5 schools in the Jasper Independent School District, only one of them a high school. Teens who graduate from the high school usually head for higher academic ground or better-paying jobs at plants in larger Texas cities, like Beaumont or Port Arthur. A few others make the short commute to the southern end of the county to work at plants like the large paper mill in Evadale. Others make a decent living at oil refineries, mostly next door in Louisiana. Those who stay behind don't have many options, unless a relative owns a lumber mill. A lot of the other jobs pay only the minimum wage, or slightly better. Routines reserved for weekdays, school, church events, and work, take place in a highly public fashion, in the open for all to participate in and judge. For the majority, the medium gait of life in Jasper is perfect. Not too fast, not too slow. Residents take care of business and look out for each other. They do so without all the big city hassles, without the rush and crush of traffic nightmares and rude citified behavior. Come 6 o'clock Friday night, things slow to a crawl. Local streets empty as people rest and change their body clocks to reflect weekend time. By Saturday, many make the 70-mile trek to Beaumont, or twice that distance to faraway Houston, to break the monotony of Bud Longnecks, plate-sized chicken-fried steaks, and 2- and 3-star movies at the Twin Cinema. Given that there is little to do in Jasper on the weekend, others routinely grab Burger King specials, or pack up their own food for picnic get-togethers at nearby Martin Dyes Jr. State Park. Dozens more hitch up the boat or jet skis and head for Steinhagen Lake, Toledo Bend, or Sam Rayburn Reservoir, a beautiful body of water named after the native son who proudly served as one of the nation's most colorful speakers of the House of Representatives, and who is widely remembered for his dogged insistence that his colleagues vote for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Others, shunning big city lights and nearby tourist attractions, love the quiet serenity and beauty of Jasper. Like any small town, Jasper has its share of hotheads and lawbreakers, but for the most part, decent citizens want good, clean fun. Without any large nightclubs, a favorite Jasper pastime is an old-fashioned blue light house party, with good music and close friends. Attendees can drink as much as they want in the privacy of someone's home and avoid the weekend crackdown on public alcohol consumption. Texas peace officers are rare but firm upholders of the state's hard-to-enforce open container law. Don't get caught driving while taking a swig. Residents make sure, day or night, that whatever they are drinking behind the wheel in a brown paper bag is a Coke or cream soda. Yet liquor is plentiful on the outskirts of Jasper, a dry community located within a very wet county of more than 30,000 people. Many don't think it's a problem to serve alcohol at a private, invitation-only house party, even if they do live in a dry town. Some residents have even been known to bootleg, make their own barrel whiskey, an illegal activity that does not sit well with law-abiding neighbors. Jasper's pristine location in the Deep South Bible Belt provokes more than a few upright Christians to morally chastise their neighbors. One anonymous citizen posed the provocative question, "If Jasper's really a dry town and folks can't buy liquor here, why are there so many alcoholics?" On Saturday night, June 6th, 1998, Jimmy Mays had the perfect reason to have one of those old-fashioned parties at his house. Besides his son's birthday, it was his 20th wedding anniversary. James Bird, Jr., a 49-year-old unemployed former vacuum salesman, was among the guests who showed up at the large gray and white trailer home. Bird was popular in Jasper, well known for his charisma and beautiful singing voice. In and out of minor legal scrapes since high school, Bird was often described by family and friends as a man who never hurt anyone but himself. The divorced father of 3 was proud of his deserved reputation as a lover of life, but equally ashamed of a very real drinking problem that sometimes left him lonely and alone. Besides Bird, more than 40 people turned out to eat good food, drink good whiskey, sing, dance, and play cards and dominoes. At the end of a long week, many in the crowd were simply glad to be among friends, and grateful that someone was in the mood to host a Saturday night house party. George Billy Mahaffey was right in the thick of things. Handsome, unmistakably a ladies' man, with curly jet-black hair and almond-colored eyes, Mahaffey was something of a local fixture around town. The burly, friendly-looking owner of Billy's BBQ couldn't help but notice a slight difference in his boyhood friend. Bird's not his usual self, Mahaffey would later testify. Quiet, not singing and dancing like he normally does. Everyone at the lively get-together laughed, talked, drank, and toasted Mays and his wife. The weather was a tad warm, but pleasantly bearable. By tough Texas standards, the Mays house party was a great success. A savory musical gumbo of blues, soul, hip-hop, jazz, a little something for everyone. Bird half enjoyed the music and wrestled with distant thoughts, maybe a personal dilemma. He seemed distracted, but continued to drink and joke around. For whatever reason, Bird did not belt out the tunes he was famous for. Like a few others, Mahaffey had had a bit too much to drink. But it was Saturday night and he was among friends. As the festive anniversary party came to a close, he chose a more sober friend, Samuel Williams, to give him a ride home. He smiled at the host and bid the Mays family good night. The neat trailer emptied as the party ended. Williams and Mahaffey left sometime between 1:30 and 1:45 a.m. on Sunday, June 7th. It wasn't too far to Mahaffey's house, almost around the corner from Jimmy Mays, but Mahaffey was glad for the ride. Right near Martin Luther King Boulevard, the tipsy passenger noticed James Bird, Jr. on Bowie Street, near Mahaffey's house. The men did not stop to give Bird a ride. They believed he could make it on his own, as he had so many times before. Though Bird owned an old car, one that had been out of commission a whole month, anyone who knew Bird also knew that he was not afraid to walk anywhere in town. It was not uncommon for black people to walk in Jasper, or white people, for that matter. Public transportation was almost non-existent, and there was no bus line or major taxi service. People paid small sums, if they had it, for neighbors and relatives to give them rides to necessary places. Or they just walked. When Billy Mahaffey entered his residence, he was so sure Bird could make it home that he never looked back. Bird zigzagged down the road in a drunken stupor, taking step after wide step, a route he almost knew blindfolded, one that usually got him home in pitch-black darkness. At about the same time the fun ended at the Mays home, a private party also wrapped up across town at the Timbers Apartments, upstairs in number 214, a tiny rented space on West Gibson Street, the main drag in Jasper. 21-year-old Keisha Adkins was there, along with her former boyfriend, 23-year-old John William King, a handsome local with brown hair and brown eyes, and a justified reputation as the hot-headed boy next door who can turn abruptly nasty. Earlier in the evening, Adkins had run into King at the local Walmart. Out of jail only a few months, the persuasive talker extended an invitation to his apartment. Flattered by renewed attention from King, Adkins examined his 5'8" frame and saw that King had put on a little weight. Still, he looked good to Adkins as she mulled over the tempting proposition. At about 10:30 p.m., shy, soft-spoken Keisha Adkins, a pale brunette, firmly knocked on King's door. The Timbers was a plain apartment complex. The wood-planked stairs and a small landing were barely large enough for 2 people. Adkins discovered that King was not alone. Jailhouse buddy Lawrence Russell Brewer, a 31-year-old convict from Sulphur Springs, Texas, had arrived in town only days before and was staying with King. Adkins knew Brewer was new to Jasper, and she looked him over and noted his physical attributes. He was small in stature, about 5'6", 145 pounds, dark hair, and beady eyes. Remarkably muscular, he was a tough little man who looked as if he could take care of himself. King and Brewer, a mutual admiration society of misfits, celebrated their victorious reunion, free men, at the same time, out in the world together. They started to drink cold Bud Lights and Coors Lights way before Adkins arrived. King playfully took off his shirt, another Saturday night ritual in June that in some neighborhoods went hand in hand with beer, white boys, and the pursuit of babes. Not easily intimidated, Adkins studied King's drastically changed body, slightly pot-bellied and riddled with menacing tattoos. Adkins would later testify they did not offend her. The silly depiction of cartoon character Woody Woodpecker wearing a Klan robe was mildly humorous, if a person liked racist jokes. King's other tattoos were not so comical. One in particular, of a hanging black man, was neither a joke nor a cartoon. King did not openly discuss his radical views on race with Adkins, nor did he hide them. Tattooed arms, back, and torso spoke volumes. There was even a drawing of the Disney character Tinker Bell, located on King's genitals. It was the one tattoo King was ready to show Adkins privately. While the ex-lovers renewed their relationship in the master bedroom, Brewer kept busy with loud music and the phone. He was on the lookout for King's current girlfriend. Brewer couldn't be happy that his role was relegated to watchdog, but that did not stop him from consuming more beer. Beer the 2 convicted burglars had stolen earlier. Without money, there was not much else to do in Jasper on a Saturday night. Kylie Greeny, King's very pregnant girlfriend, showed up at the front door. She banged on the door and forcefully demanded to be let in. While Adkins and King were together, just a few feet away, Brewer was left with strict orders not to let in the future mother of King's child. More afraid of King than of his girlfriend, Brewer faithfully guarded the front door. Upset and frustrated, Greeny finally gave up and stomped back down the steps and out of the complex. Sometime after midnight, King's 23-year-old roommate, Sean Allen Berry, showed up. Barry, the only one of the three friends who held a regular job, had finished up work as manager of the Twin Cinema, locked the movie theater for the night, and returned to the one-bedroom apartment. Highly regarded as someone who could hold his own in a fight, Barry always carried a sharp, straight blade. Though he was the shortest of the three friends, just 5'5", 160 pounds, Barry earned respect as a scrappy young man, one with dependable transportation, good looks, and a well-documented adventurous spirit. He was more personable than King or Brewer, and had adequate social skills and a number of hobbies, including bull riding. Barry lived for the end of each hard week. He couldn't wait to grab a cold beer to let off a little Saturday night steam. As usual, Sean Barry was ready to roll. Before June 6th, King and Adkins had talked only by phone. They were excited to see one another. Oblivious to the painfully small apartment and extra companions, any potential discomfort or embarrassment wasn't apparent when they emerged from King's bedroom. Adkins hadn't seen her old boyfriend in 2 long years. King walked Adkins to her car. His impatient running buddies, eager to leave, brainstormed ideas on how to spend Saturday night in Jasper. Brewer wanted to try and find a girl who had earlier invited them to a party, where they might meet more girls. Barry, whose vehicle they rode around in, was restless, ready to go with the flow. But all did not go according to plan. Adkins was the only female the trio would get to see that Saturday night. Unfortunately for them, her presence at the Timbers Apartments helped to establish a crucial timeline. When all four walked out of King's apartment and concluded the quarantined party, Adkins believed the time was about 1:45 a.m., give or take a few minutes, on Sunday. Adkins got into her car, saw the three men climb into Barry's ashy-gray step-side pickup. She later testified as to the seat assignments. Sean is driving, Russell sits in the middle, and Bill is on the right side. The three men drove away, and for a few minutes traveled just ahead of Adkins' car. She watched three animated heads bob and turn, fingers point and gesture. After Adkins turned off toward her home, 45 miles away in Fred, the three partygoers loudly continued on down the road. Keisha Adkins rushed to get home before Brian, her common-law husband, pulled up from his graveyard shift. Just as the three white boys drove off looking for entertainment in one part of Jasper, James Bird, Jr. left Jimmy May's anniversary party on the other side of town, in the black community. 4 lives were set to collide. James Bird, Jr. continued to stagger down Martin Luther King. He was drunk, but in the back of his mind he believed he could make it to one of 2 places: his tiny subsidized apartment on Pollard Street, or his parents' home on nearby West Broad. Hopeful but disoriented, he stumbled on. Bird, a lifelong resident, was easily recognized by many. People often spoke to him. Authorities picked him up. Total strangers liked to hear him sing. Although he took some wrong turns in life, Bird was obsessed by a dream of fame and fortune, with a new career that would allow him to perform. 18-year-old Stephen Scott instantly identified Bird on the side of the road, even slowed down. The lanky, well-mannered college student thought to offer Bird a ride home. Nearly did, but quickly changed his mind and followed his conscience, which told him to drive on and leave Bird alone. To the young man, it wasn't worth the trouble because Bird appeared very drunk, meandering all over the road. Momentarily remorseful, Scott drove right on by Bird. He was the second acquaintance or friend to do so. After all, a lot of people in Jasper walked to get where they were going. Scott was on his way home from a popular Beaumont nightclub. Determined to beat his mother's curfew, if only by a few minutes, and maybe get some rest before Sunday church service, Scott drove on. He did not want to use the few precious minutes he had left to fool with Mr. Bird. Scott's unshakable timeline tallied with what Adkins later told authorities. She placed King, Brewer, and Barry in the pickup shortly before 2 a.m. A few minutes later, Scott saw a fourth passenger in the truck, noting with surprise that Bird was riding on the back of a step-side truck, which zoomed right by him. A red and white cooler, which contained beer, rested in the back of Barry's rickety 1982 Ford. They drank and rode. When they couldn't find any women, somebody got the idea that it might be fun to tie a chain around a wooden mailbox, uproot it, and drag it down the street. It was fun for a while, but once the mailbox excitement played out and the beer in the cooler started to run low, they decided to take their fun to another level. Moments later, the pranksters discovered a black man walking in the road, minding his own business. Their next diversion was about to begin. The unwitting victim believed someone would finally help him find the way home. "Hey, you need a ride?" Barry called to Bird, a man he knew by sight, but not by name. No response. Barry tried again. "Do you want to go home or what?" Bird was not so drunk he didn't recognize at least one friendly face, the one behind the wheel. "No, I'll hang out with you white boys for a while," he responded. Bird, who served time for theft, and Barry had the same parole officer. Their paths may have crossed before. James Bird, Jr. slowly climbed on the back of Sean Barry's truck. He had no reason to fear. After all, everybody in Jasper knew everybody else. Bird quickly positioned himself farther up the truck's hard metal floor, back to back with King, Brewer, and Barry, who were all inside. The truck didn't have its tailgate on, so it was dangerous to sit too near the rear. An offer of beer was made, and Bird did not hesitate. The square picnic cooler was right near Bird. He reached in, popped the top, and started to drink. Bird was dog-tired and thirsty from a circular walk that had gotten him no closer to home. The hospitality ended before Bird could even consume the whole can of beer. Barry's simple offer to give a black man a ride home set King off. Livid, he turned to Barry, red-faced and suddenly more sober than drunk, and made an announcement. "That's some hoe-ass shit picking up a fucking nigger." Apparently unfazed by the tone or by the kind of racist language he heard all the time, Barry drove on, laughed it off, wound all the way down Martin Luther King Boulevard, picked up FM 776, a farm-to-market road, then turned on State Highway 63 and traveled east. A short time later, they pulled over at BJ's Grocery, a small mom-and-pop convenience store just off the highway. Though closed, it was at BJ's that the events quickly escalated to the beginning of the end for James Bird, Jr. After the men relieved themselves out in the open, Bird traded places with two men he did not know. Two avowed, die-hard racists, King and Brewer, posing as good colorblind Boy Scouts, volunteered their prime seats in the cab so a black man could sit up front. Bird, trusting and still inebriated, got in the cab with Barry, while King and Brewer took their self-designated places riding shotgun on the back of the truck, the fresh night air in their faces. Bird was mostly quiet. Still behind the wheel, Barry offered Bird a smoke and headed for the off-road joyride that King suggested earlier. Deep into the Texas thicket was an old logging road, a trail few could find by light of sun or moon. Suddenly, Barry made a wild turn from the main road. Bird's full attention was at last aroused. "Where are we going?" he asked. Barry answered, "We're just riding." Bird almost instantly found himself in darker, thicker woods. Barry's truck bounced up and down, glided in and out of giant dirt pockets on the unmarked, out-of-the-way logging road, until without warning, King banged hard on the top of the truck and yelled to Barry, "Stop for a minute!" Barry obeyed. But before he could turn off the engine, King and Brewer excitedly jumped from the side and rear of the truck. The loud motor raced on as King and Brewer violently pulled at Bird to tear him from the truck. Bird disabled, a chronic arthritis sufferer, about 5 feet 9 and 160 pounds, was trapped and suddenly in the battle of his life. He fought hard. For a tired, intoxicated man almost twice the age of his attackers, Bird's defense was impressive. He kicked, screamed, hung on to the frame of the truck, yelled for help, all the while praying to figure out what he was up against. Not in complete control of his faculties, Bird's motor skills were dull and awkward, but fear fueled a passionate self-defense. He fought harder. According to later testimony, Barry bolted from the truck, ran to the other side, and made some half-hearted attempt to stop the attack. King and Brewer continued the difficult task at hand, prying Bird out of the truck in order to scare the shit out of him. The struggle intensified, got louder, faster, more furious. No one could believe all the energy it took to peel Bird's hands from the frame of the pickup. He hung on for dear life. No one heard his pleas for help. Agitated by Bird's raw audacity to fight, King stepped back and shouted, "Fuck it, let's kill this nigger." The assailants finally managed to rip Bird from the truck's cab. Once they did, it was relatively easy to pull him to the ground. While Bird still asked God for help, begging for mercy, they began to beat and kick him as hard as possible. The earth-absorbed missed blows, swallowed up evidence. Barry wet his pants. His waist trickled down designer blue jeans and past his polo boots to the same ground where fresh drops of blood had fallen. A cheap Zippo cigarette lighter with the word possum and KKK engraved on it flew out of its owner's pocket. A brand new souvenir baseball cap with San Francisco emblazoned across the front was long gone from the victim's head. It was on the ground, joined by long neck beer bottles, a partially empty pack of Marlboro Reds, cigarette butts, and a nut wrench with Barry scratched onto it. Pieces of a puzzle carelessly discarded, easy evidence for the state's prosecution. Bird was savagely beaten and kicked, maliciously hit about the body and head, too many blows to count. Brewer grabbed a can of black spray paint from the truck. Bird still moved way too much. Brewer later admitted to pointing it right in Bird's bruised face and spraying the black man with the black paint. King shouted, "Don't do that! Don't spray nobody in the face!" But Brewer asserted it was extra punishment and further humiliation for Bird because he was mad that he hurt his foot kicking Bird. Seriously injured and unable to see, Bird was stunned and helpless, flailing at anything he felt come near. Then, the hardest, hottest kick of all, straight to Bird's head. He finally stopped fighting and dropped. He did not move again. He was blinded by the spray paint, flat on his back, out of breath, but still alive. His determined captors grabbed another item from the bed of the gray pickup, a used, rusty log chain. Bird's pants and underwear were pulled down to his ankles. Before they snatched loose his clothing, exposing Bird in the most cruel physical way, King took a moment to explain to the others that the same thing was done in the old days to niggers who messed with white women. The log chain was unfolded and quickly looped around the ball on the hitch of the pickup, with each end strategically wrapped around Bird's ankles. All three men jumped back into the truck's cab, prepared to drag a man while he was still alive. Though it was not too late to turn back, to stop, to call it off, not one of them did. Before Bird could reach his final destination, there was untold suffering, unimaginable pain. He felt every single weed, every endless speck of grass and dirt, every chasm, and every inch of asphalt. The dragging started on the hemmed-in logging road. Not long after, Bird's body slipped loose from the chain. They slammed on the brakes to recover their defenseless victim. Drunk with enthusiasm and frenzy, the driver backed up too far, too fast, possibly running over Bird's extensively disfigured body, scraped, scratched, skinned alive. The body got tangled underneath the truck. Laughs echoed in the night. The driver accelerated forward, over Bird once more. Someone jumped out. Seconds later, Bird was rechained, and the dragging resumed. Partly conscious, Bird used his elbows and knees to try to keep his head up off the road. Meanwhile, from inside the cab of the truck, yells of fun pierced the night. "Look, that nigger's bouncing all over the place." Laughter reverberated as Bird's body was dragged through rocks, loamy dirt, tree branches, and trash. The truck turned left onto an adjoining blacktop artery, Huff Creek Road, up out of the heavy bush, off of the no-name logging road, out into a more open space where people lived, went to church, and buried their dead. Bird was alive, but could not scream. With what little strength he had left, Bird made a valiant effort to keep his head above the hard concrete. The truck's driver sped on, driving his brand of racism and hatred smack dab into the middle of a black community, bold as you please. Bird's naked body was hurled from one side of the road to the other. Then he hit a culvert that decapitated him. His brutal tormentors continued to drag Bird's headless body. Parts were torn from his body like twigs from a branch. They fell by the side of the road, in a ditch, then near a decrepit wood frame building, and all along the road. His head, partially attached to a separated shoulder, was about a mile from the ripped lower torso. The once human face had drag marks on it. What was left of his body was released from the chain near a small black cemetery, holy ground, where speechless ancestors witnessed the deed. His dismembered body sent a message to all. You could be next. Daybreak was near. Sunday morning filled the area with parishioners who normally attended Rose Bloom Baptist Church, an ordinary, sweetly innocent country house of worship. Death's path of 3 miles was there for all to see. People, mostly black people, had to walk this way. They lived here, loved and died here, and had witnessed this kind of hatred before. To yet another generation, it seemed a revival of the activities of the White Citizens Council, a civil rights era committee of hood-free racists whose predecessors were brutal night riders with a preference for ropes and horses.